Good morning, peeps. A little surprise video here. I was looking at the commentary this week. I'm sorry, the lectionary this week. Noticed it was Mark chapter 13, verses 1 through 8. It's the end of Pentecost. Next week we'll begin Advent. And as I'm looking at this text on what I think what used to be called Christ the King Sunday, and we've obviously dumped that. But here it is, the last Sunday in Pentecost of this year, and it ends on the most rather remarkable note with regard to where we are in America today. I mean, it's just like one of those texts that speaks so directly to our situation today. It's astonishing. And, you know, one of the things Rene Girard noted was that apocalyptic, because it had been so abused and misused by Christians, had fallen out of favor, but that it played a very significant role in a mimetic reading of history. And this text is part of what's known as Mark's little apocalypse, the apocalyptic discourse of Mark chapter 13. And I would just note that it is, you know, I don't know how to say this. The easiest way to say it's a cribbed together passage. That is it's obvious that somebody is taking sayings of Jesus and brought them together to create this scenario, this little apocalypse of what we're looking at. Now, is it possible Jesus said all this stuff at once? Sure, I suppose. I think it's a little more intelligent, though, to see this as a text that's been brought together. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have anything to do with Jesus, because Jesus is very, very apocalyptically oriented, something that the Jesus Seminar just absolutely freaks out about. But here's the thing. Jesus is not apocalyptically oriented the way they think. He's oriented apocalyptically the way Doug Campbell describes apocalypse. And it's too bad our Jesus Seminar friends could never get that definition as a working definition of Jesus and his apocalyptic worldview. If they did, it would change everything in Jesus studies. But that's neither here nor there. That's just an aside. So let's if you got a Bible, turn to Mark chapter 13. I'll read the whole text, the lectionary text for today, as though we're in a church here. It begins, "And as he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, 'Look, teacher, what wonderful stones and what wonderful buildings.' And Jesus said to him, 'Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down.' And as he sat on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, 'Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign when these things are about to be accomplished?' And Jesus began to say to them, 'Take heed that no one lead you astray. Many will come in my name, saying, I am he. And they will lead many astray. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars, don't be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the sufferings.'" Folks, there is so much here to unpack. So let's do a little text work here and have some fun. Because if there's any text right now that speaks to the problem of American Protestant Christianity, it is this one right here. I want to show you how. I want to show you why. I want to take some insights from people like Robert Hamilton Kelly, Joel Marcus, James Charlesworth, E.P. Sanders here today, and others, Girard. So, first thing to note, I want to start with the opening sentence of what is perhaps one of the best books on the Gospel of Mark by Robert Hamilton Kelly, The Gospel and the Sacred. Good luck trying to find this on Amazon. It's been out of print for a few years, but this is how Bob opens this book. "The temple is the central symbol in the Gospel of Mark because it is the focal point of the Passion. Now, you all know I have stressed 1,000 million times the importance of the Passion narrative in a way as a canon within a canon, and all that a theology of the cross means when interpreting the entirety of Scripture and Christian theology. You have to begin there. And Kelly notes, Bob Emerton Kelly notes, that the temple is the central symbol in the Gospel of Mark because it's the focal point of the Passion. He notes, all the action leading up to the death of Jesus in chapters 11 through 15 takes place either in relation to the temple or in the temple precinct itself. So the thing is, if you go look, you start, in Mark chapter 11, and beginning in verse 12, they come back from Bethany. Jesus curses the fig tree. There's the temple incident that we are so familiar with, of the turning over of the tables, the money changers' tables, and the driving out of the animals. There is the coming back by the fig tree and seeing that it bore no fruit, and that, of course, is a Markan. It's a sandwich narrative where the bread is the fig tree and the temple is the meat in the middle, the substance in the middle. And this fig tree story brackets the temple. Jesus is saying something very important about the temple here. It's not bearing fruit. And you carry on after that with a number of different debates at the end of chapter 11, chapter 12, the incredible parable of the tenants that is such literally, for a parable, it's a direct hit at the interlocutors, and they know this. They know this parable's about them. Then, of course, you have the issue of Pharisees and Herodians wanting to entrap Jesus in the temple about questions of taxation. There's the Sadducees asking questions in the temple about resurrection. One of them wants to know, what's the greatest commandment in the temple? And Jesus says to this fella that to love your neighbor as oneself is much more than whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. This is a fellow that gets it in the temple. And then you have Jesus doing that incredible work that he does on Psalm 110:1 that we went through in the Jesus-Driven Life, if you've read that book, and how Jesus subverts the entire Hasmonean reading of that text. And then you get to chapter 13. And here we are. And then, of course, chapter 14, there's the Passover lambs are being slaughtered in the temple. And chapter 15, the trial back and forth in the temple. It's all about the temple here. Mark is all about the temple. And so you read Mark from the temple narrative backwards. That's Emerton Kelly's argument in his book, The Gospel and the Sacred. That is, just as you read any text from the Passion narrative backward, now you include the temple narrative to read Mark backward, to understand Mark, because Mark is one great big book of conflict. People, you start right out with the baptism of Jesus and the conflict with the diabolos in the desert, in the wilderness. And chapters 1, 2, and 3 are just conflict story after conflict story after conflict story. Chapter 4 is parables. Chapter 5, 6, 7, you have conflict stories mixed in with these few great miracle stories, particularly the doublet of the feeding of the 5,000 in that text. And it ends up in chapter 8, after that doublet, with the flight to Caesarea Philippi and the first of the Passion predictions, first of 3 series of Passion predictions. I mean, this whole thing from the get-go is conflict-oriented to the cross, so much so that if you have an opportunity, this is perhaps the best commentary available on the Gospel of Mark right now, Joel Marcus. It's 2 volumes, an excellent, excellent, substantial commentary. But already in this, Joel Marcus notes this cosmic battle that's taking place. By the way, if you recognize the cover, it's the same series as Lou Martin's Galatians commentary, the Anchor Bible series. But in describing this cosmic battle, one of the things that Marcus notes is what we also noted earlier, that there's literally something happening here with a redefinition of apocalyptic. And for Marcus, it's going to be Paul's influence, perhaps. It's a considered opinion on Mark that creates that. That would fit in certainly with all the work that we've done and Doug Campbell and others have done. But here you come to this text. Now, what's amazing is Jesus has all this conflict in his life with these religious authorities, but he's got these followers. They still follow him, right? And they're just as tied into this religion as Jesus' interlocutors. And finally, they get down to it, and you have to perceive here somehow a complete and total exasperation with Jesus when they say, "Look, teacher, what wonderful buildings and wonderful stones." Now, if you have opportunity to buy books, pick up Lee Levine. His book is Jerusalem. He's a Jewish scholar. It's a marvelous book. Chapter 6 is all on the temple. And Levine and others, for example, like James Charlesworth, Jesus in the Temple, note that some of the stones they've uncovered there in the temple, folks, it weigh as much as 120 tons. There's some that weigh as much as 600 tons. It's over 1 million pounds, one stone. I mean, these are enormous stones, big stones. Herod himself had hired 10,000 skilled workmen and 1,000 priests during his lifetime. I mean, this is a building project that continues all through Jesus' lifetime and Paul's lifetime. In fact, it's not finished when Rome comes to the gate in 66. It's still being built. Things are being worked on. There's scaffolding somewhere. This thing is huge. It would encompass 3 football stadiums. It has columns, Corinthian columns. It has bronze doors made from Corinthian bronze that take 200 priests to open. They're huge. They're heavy. I mean, and then it has all the glitz and glory inside of the holy place and the most holy place. The place could accommodate 100,000 people easy in the various porticos and the open temple courts. Jerusalem would swell to 1 million pilgrims during festival times, 3 times a year. That's a lot of money comes pouring into Jerusalem. And when these guys say, look, teacher, what wonderful stones, what wonderful buildings, they're thinking of this thing as like, nobody's going to take this down. This is a forever thing. There's nothing that could possibly destroy this work of art. It's a beauty. It was the 8th wonder of the world, was Herod's temple. And like all temples, it functioned as a bank. Why did wealthy private citizens not keep their money, their capital, in their homes? It's too easy for a thief to break in and steal. No, you kept your money in the temple. The temple was safe. Not only was there the temple guard, but there was the fear of God. And so temples functioned as banks in the ancient empire. Folks, if you don't see that here's where the 2 economies of exchange come together, economics and religion, I mean, already in the ancient world, today economics and religion are just as intimately tied, aren't they? Here they are too. So when these guys are saying, look, teacher, these buildings are remarkable, these stones are huge, this building project, as we're looking at it now in 33 CE, whatever year they wanted to call it at that point, and they're looking back on at least 60 years of building here and another 30 to come. You know, they're about 2/3 of the way through this massive project. And it's huge, and they can't imagine it going away. And Jesus says, you see these great buildings? I want to tell you something. There's not going to be one stone left on another. He absolutely blows their mind at this point. He's telling them, this isn't going to last. This can't last. Now that is a shock to the system. Religion cannot last. That's a shock to the human system. Christianity, my friends, is going to be experiencing right now in America the same phenomenon that is going to be experienced here in the temple narrative as told by Josephus and echoed by Mark. What am I referring to? I'm referring to religious violence, violence in the sacred. That is the concept that God is retributive and God is on our side and God will fight on our side and our retribution is God's retribution. That became enshrined in the temple by the Zealots in 66. Marcus makes the argument that it is the Zealot takeover of the temple that is the abomination of desolation that's referred to here in the text a little later on. It's sacred violence now not simply symbolically enacted in and through the temple cult. It is literally sacred violence ideologically, now combined with the temple cult, that will create the great conflagration that becomes the war against the Jews in 66 through 70. And Mark is written just shortly during and after the time of the destruction of the temple, at least according to most of the, many, I should say many good Markan scholars will place it right there, 70 to 72. And that is certainly the event that is on everybody's mind. Just as 9/11 did not leave America's mind in 2002 or 2003, it was still firmly entrenched in our memory, even if we've let it slip here these 17 years later. Those first few years after, it was firmly embedded. Even so, in Mark, as he's writing his gospel, has this fixed memory of this reality of the destruction of the temple. And in that sense, in this sense, the destruction of a way that the Jewish faith would be lived and understood. One of the things that begins to happen after the destruction of the temple under the great Rabbi Yohan ben Zakkai is a reorienting of Judaism, a gathering of the rabbinic sages and teachers and saying, okay, we don't have a temple, who are we as a people? And thus begins the journey into what we call rabbinic Judaism. Christianity goes through the same thing after the destruction of the temple, particularly Jewish Christianity, because Jewish Christianity is tied to the temple. We see this not only in the book of Acts, but in the literature related to or from Jewish Christianity in the Apocryphal New Testament. The temple is everything. It's at the heart and soul of everything that goes on in the New Testament. For those of you that were in my mentoring group, you may remember the series I did on entering the New Testament and the video I did on the temple in that series. So what are we saying here? Well, what we're saying is this. When a religion becomes co-opted by zeal, that's the end of the religion. Now, is it not the case that since really the late 1970s, we in America have seen evangelicalism absolutely co-opted by zealots? And we've seen this particularly in a Calvinist form. I mean, Calvinist zealotism is perhaps the worst form of Protestant zealotism. Of being a zealot there is. Try saying that fast. We have seen the zeal with which the religious right now, that is the evangelicals, the fundamentalists, the charismatics, we have seen the zeal with which they have brought about the marriage of their faith with a certain political party or process in this country. We have literally watched them sell their heritage for a bowl of porridge. As a result, their house is going to fall. It has to fall. No stone can be left upon another. And when it does fall, those that aren't part of it should not be engaging in schadenfreude, because it's going to mean the end of American culture as we know it. Because we have an other problem. And that's that zeal has entered into the left. As I've noted in my books, essays, Facebook blog posts, videos, the progressive Christian left and the evangelical right share the same presuppositions, and thus they share the same God. They both make room for sacred violence. And in the last 2 years, particularly as various social movements arose in America, the hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag Me Too, hashtag Not for White People, as all these hashtags arose in America, we saw the progressive Christian left immediately jumping on board and seeing an opportunity for them to express their particular value system. Now look, I share their value system. You have to understand this. I share their value system. I do not share their approach to religion or culture, because it's sacrificial in its orientation, and that's the problem with it. And so what we are seeing now is an increase of zealotism on the progressive Christian left. Interestingly, as soon as the elections were over last week, you saw all manner of sound and fury just die off the progressive Christian blog pages, and it's just like, okay, we won, we got our thing. Now we're just going to wait, and everything now is just all going to be anti-Trump. That's all it can be. But zealotism is the problem, and it has found its way into liberal Protestant Christianity. And so when Jesus says there will be no stone left, I am telling you right now, within 8 years, with the collapse of American Protestant Christian religion, and it will collapse not because people are tired of it, because people will realize that the God that's being preached by this Protestant religion in America, no matter what side you take, is an ugly God. It's not Jesus. You don't see Jesus on the right, and you really don't see Jesus on the left. You might see him a little more on the left. I'm going to grant them that much. But you really don't see Jesus. This religion, American Protestant Christianity, is falling apart right now. You can see it. Watch it happen. It's amazing. And so we all want to know, when will it happen? When will it happen? And we're like Peter, James, John, and Andrew. I don't know how Andrew managed to sneak in there. It's the only text where the triumvirate becomes a quaternity. Is that correct? 4 people. When will this be? When will the signs? When will this all happen? You know, they want to know. Now it's just like, okay, man, this is serious stuff. If Jesus, you're telling us this is the end of religion, like, we got to know. What are the signs? How are we going to be able to see this? And he says, look, first of all, there'll be a lot of people out there that are going to claim that I am he, and they will lead many astray, and they have for 2,000 years. Anybody that says they're the one is a liar. There's only one, and that's Jesus. There is no other one. The rest of us at best are the body, okay, connected. Whenever you have people that say they're the one, you know they're not the one. And the other thing he says is, when you hear wars and rumors of wars, don't be alarmed. This has got to take place. The end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, earthquakes. I mean, all this stuff's got to happen. And then he says, after you got all this stuff going on, he says, this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. Now think about that. You got to go through, ready for this? Wars and rumors of more wars. Because the last thing you want when you're in a war is the rumor of another war or another war. Because that means the world's falling apart. Nation will rise against nation. Certainly sounds familiar. Kingdom against kingdom. They do it overtly with troops. They do it covertly with cyber warfare. There are many ways that nations battle nations now. Kingdoms battle kingdoms. They do it with propaganda, misinformation, fooling around in other nations' elections like America has done for decades. You know, I mean, really, come on. The Russians fooled in our election. Okay, you know, get me one, shame on you, Mr. Putin. But if you do it again and we buy it, shame on us. But we've been doing it for centuries in South America and Africa, influencing elections. I mean, yeah. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes. Now, again, earthquakes are a metaphor here, just as the sun falling from the sky, and these things are metaphors in this text, but metaphors for great upheavals. So when you see the planet as you know it in various types of warfare and rumors of war, when you see social upheaval and famines, when you see people not being fed, it's a good thing that hasn't happened yet. It's a good thing there's nobody starving on the planet right now. Wink, wink. This is but the beginning. Welcome to America, my friends. Mark 13 style, because it's coming. Jesus tells you, take heed, don't be led astray. That's not the end of the story. We know that. We know that it continues on in Mark 13. We know that Jesus will die. We know that God will raise him from the dead, seat him at the right hand, and make him Lord of all. The one who has announced the destruction of all religion by his cross. The one who, through the cross, took away the power of religion, death. The one who, through the cross, defeated the architect of religion, Satan. The one who, by dying, revealed the true heart of the Father, forgiveness. That's the Gospel of Mark. That's your sermon for today. Cheers.